myself or Dave in the back. And then lastly, we are celebrating our 100th anniversary as a museum in 2025 and 2026. So if you guys want to keep an eye out on our social media and our website for events that we're having to celebrate being around for 100 years. Thank you. We're very excited about that. Jennifer, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you to Blount Mansion for having me here. This is only my second talk that I've been able to do for this book. I did another one on Tuesday for the Embroiderers Guild here in Knoxville, but we did originally have this scheduled for May, and somehow UPS lost the books, so it's not really worth having a book signing if you don't have the books. But we do have them, and I think I see some left. You will see Walt if you would like to purchase one. And then we also have, I know somebody had mentioned they wanted to get note cards and charts, and so we do also have those, and you'll see Susan after the talk if you want to get some of that. And then we have the Blount Mansion from the Blount Mansion collection, a sampler from their collection to look at, as well as the reproduction, and then a reproduction that I did, as well as a poster of the original sampler. So anyway, my name is Jennifer Core, and I'm going to talk to you all about an entire century of samplers today. And somebody requested that I talk for 3 hours, but I'm afraid that my talk is timed for more like 45 minutes. So you'll just have to come to more talks if you want more. And for those of you who came on Tuesday, some of this is going to be a little repetitive, but the medium part of it is different. So in 2004, first of all, I'd always been interested in samplers. My mom taught me how to stitch when I was 9. And when I was in 1 year, I was stuck in Detroit, Michigan, and I went to the Henry Ford Museum there, and I purchased a kit from the Exemplary, and that was the first chart that I ever did on linen. That was in 1997, and so I got really into samplers, and in 2000, I went to Nashville to work for the Tennessee Arts Commission, and everybody had always said that Tennessee didn't have samplers. And so I started asking when I went places to do site visits, do you have a sampler? Do you know of a sampler? And I started compiling a list, and I had about 12 or 13 on that list. And I was doing some work at the Tennessee State Museum, and the textile curator there, Candace Adelson, said, oh, one of our volunteers just retired as the curator at Belmead Plantation, and she's really interested in samplers too, and you all should meet one another. So she introduced me in 2004 to Janet Hasson. And what Janet and I did, because I had a background in nonprofit management, was we incorporated as a nonprofit so that we could accept grants and donations to fund our research. And so we divided up the duties. I was in charge of photography and the technical analysis of the samplers, and Janet really got the genealogy bug and started researching all of the stitchers. And we sort of had to draw a line in the sand and say we were only going to go back one generation and forward one generation with them, because otherwise we would have never finished this book, which took 20 years to do. So July 1st, the book came out, and so a lot of you have it in your lap, so thank you for purchasing it. When we started doing this, we looked at what sampler research was already out there. And in 1921, the Colonial Dames had done a nationwide survey where they asked their members to tell them about samplers that they owned. And in that book, there was only one Tennessee sampler. And we actually managed to find that sampler again. Betty Ring was a very early scholar in textile arts. And she kind of didn't think there were samplers in Tennessee or in the South. Her book, Girlhood Embroidery, had a very short chapter on samplers south of the Mason-Dixon line. And people would say there weren't samplers here because they all got destroyed in the Civil War, or they got eaten by boll weevils, or people were too poor to do samplers, or people weren't educated enough to do samplers. None of that is actually true. Kim Ivey in 1997 from Colonial Williamsburg put out a book on Virginia samplers. And then in 2002, Sue Studebaker did a book on Ohio samplers. And we looked at that book very carefully because she found about 300 samplers in Ohio. And we thought, well, okay, Ohio, Tennessee, Kentucky all became states on the same day. So we should probably be able to find about that many in Tennessee. In Tennessee, the only sampler research that had been done was by Rick Warwick, who is the Davidson County historian. And he had hosted an exhibit in 1993 and put out a very small black and white catalog. And then what we did, we both knew Rick through work, and we went to Rick when we started, and before we had even incorporated, and said, Rick, we want to do a book on samplers, and will you help us? And he said, well, you know, I managed to find 30 in Williamson County, so you all go find 30 more. And when you find 30 more, I'll give you everything I have on the ones that I documented. And I mean, like a month later, we were back, saying, hand it all over, Rick. And he was very generous. He gave us original slides that had been professionally photographed. He put us in contact with everybody who had originally loaned to that exhibit. And so we were off to a very good start. My background is the decorative arts and material culture, so we also looked at the decorative arts in Tennessee. And some of these books, that coverless book, if you can find that, it's now $800, and the Art and Mystery of Tennessee Furniture, I think, is now $500. So if you ever see a book on Tennessee decorative arts, you might want to go ahead and buy it before it goes out of print. But we did look at these, and we did actually talk with some of these authors. The Quilts book is by Bets Ramsey and Mary Kay Volvocal, and Bets is still alive and quilting at the age of 101. And so what happened was Bets took me and Candace, the textile curator, with her on documentation trips. So kind of like Antiques Roadshow, where people would bring their quilts. And Candace and I helped her with those quilts and learned about the documentation process. And Bets gave us her documentation forms, which we then adapted into documentation forms for ourselves. And this is what they look like. And they're also in the book, because what we want is to, you know, we've kind of been mentoring the guy that's doing Kentucky samplers and kind of been mentoring somebody who's interested in Alabama samplers. What we do when we do a documentation, when we find out about a sampler, and most of the samplers are still privately owned. That's why people thought there weren't any samplers in the state of Tennessee, because 95% of the samplers, when we documented them, are still in the family. So what we would do is find out so-and-so has a sampler, so we would show up on their doorstep with our gear, you know, a giant light kit and all these boxes and measuring tapes and loops and stuff like that. And they would say, oh, we weren't quite expecting this. It's a little hard to explain to somebody that I want to rearrange all their furniture so that I can get the best light, and I need an electrical outlet, and it's going to take 2 hours. So what we would do is take an oral history from the owner, and I will tell you now that most people have absolutely no idea what their family history is. We oftentimes had to go back and correct things for them. And then we would do a technical analysis of the sampler, and we would photograph it as well and get a signed release form. And we would tell the people, we are writing a book, we're going to put this on the web, this is what's going to happen to your information. When you do something like this, you have to be organized, you have to come up with a numbering convention, and you have to have really good photographs if you're going to do anything with them. And then this is where Janet really took off. She loves going into archives and digging up all kinds of stuff. And these are just some of the documents that we looked at, some of the primary sources that we looked at to reconstruct the lives of the sampler stitchers. And I guess I should say now what a sampler actually is, since somebody asked me that on Tuesday. A sampler is a product of the schoolroom. It was done by girls who were aged between 6 and 16 usually, and it would have been something that their teacher designed or helped them design. And the point of a sampler, long ago when they first emerged in North Africa, was as something that you could show somebody else. You would show them, here are the patterns and motifs that I have mastered. What do you want on your clothing? And then they could point at a band or they could point at a motif. Samplers, when they came to Europe and as they went through Europe, became a schoolroom exercise. And sometimes they were records of different stitches. You know, sometimes you would see where they would start off with a cross stitch and then maybe do a Smyrna cross stitch and then maybe do a four-sided stitch, and so you could see the advancement of skills that the girls had. Samplers became a signifier of education, and so they served kind of like a diploma would serve in our culture today. And so parents would send their daughters to a school. They would pay extra for these classes. The daughters would work on a sampler over a semester or a school term. And then when it was done, the parents would shell out a lot of money to have it framed. And then they would place it in a place of pride. It would usually be in the parlor, sometimes above the fireplace. So we oftentimes find samplers that have smoke damage that you can see going up like this. And so anybody who came to that public part of the house would know they have educated daughters. They have enough money to send their daughters to school, because a girl's education is more expensive than a boy's education. We had a custom designed database where we could produce reports, and when we finished with a sampler, the owner would receive a technical report, an 8 by 10 photograph of it, a genealogical, a brief biography of the girl, and then any of the supplementary material that we had found, like marriage license or something like that. What we did once we got into it and we had found about 150 samplers, we started trying to have an actual product. And so we did have an exhibit at the Polk Home, and we wrote articles for different magazines. We have a website, and we did a lot of lectures. Now, our end goal was always a book. We always told people we were working on a book, and so we kept on. I thought when we started it would take 5 years. After 5 years, I said, okay, 8 years. After 8 years, I said, we're not going to keep track anymore. It's just going to take as long as it takes. And then Janet said, I'm going to die soon, so when I get it's done, it has to be published before I'm dead. So actually, COVID was forced me to stay at home and actually write. So that was actually a good thing for the production of this book. The book, which many of you have in your lap, is divided into these different chapters. The main part of it that I think most people are going to want to look at are the chapters on the 3 grand divisions and the samplers that we found across the state. We do have a lot of appendices, and that's for the people. Somebody emailed me and she said, oh, you're going to think I'm so crazy. I started with the appendices. And I said, no, I know exactly the type of person you are. That is not crazy. I understand what you've done. I used to tell my students when I was teaching, when you check out a book just to look at the bibliography, it is all over for you. You've gone over to the dark side at that point. But we also tracked the teachers in schools, because that is how the patterns were transmitted as they migrated from east to west, or as they went from school to school. And if we know that a lot of people are going to want this because they're interested in their own family history. And so we tried to make it easy for you to find those family names. So Tennessee, you all live here, you know that we're divided into the 3 grand divisions. And usually when I give this lecture, I start in East Tennessee and work my way west. But tonight, I'm going to start in West Tennessee and work my way east. In West Tennessee, we only found 17 samplers, and there's a lot of complicated reasons for this. West Tennessee was opened for settlement in 1818, and there's just not the infrastructure, like the land parcels were quite large. Before the Civil War, there were only 4 female academies founded in West Tennessee, and contrast that to Williamson County alone had 17 female academies before the Civil War. So there wasn't, the population was not as established, and so we don't really have schools or groups emerging in West Tennessee. We do know, however, because she put the school name on it, that Eugenia Griffin worked this one in 1943 or 1949, and it has the name St. Agnes on it, and St. Agnes is still a school that is still operating in Memphis. And this, you can tell, is from the mid part of the century. It's worked in wool on a large count cotton ground fabric. And so here we have an advertisement for St. Agnes Academy and the detail of her name, where unfortunately that particular wool has faded. Now, this is in the collection here. This is Mary Elizabeth, who went by the name Eliza Cotton, and she is from LaGrange in Fayette County. So I will tell you how this West Tennessee sampler ended up here in East Tennessee. She was the daughter, I'm to look at my notes here, of a colonel, and was the first of the family to be born in Tennessee. They originated in North Carolina. and they were one of the founding families of LaGrange in Fayette County. Her father built Willow Glen Plantation, and she likely attended a female boarding and day school there, opened in 1837 by a minister of the Emmanuel Episcopal Church. When her father died in 1836, his will directed that his wife and children would receive equal shares of the estate, providing Willow Glen Plantation be kept intact until each of his children married or came of age. So she married John Mercer Wright, and her husband was a civil engineer. The family home was parceled off, and she got 415 acres out of that, and her mother got 650 acres. She did not have any children. In the 1880 census, they have moved to Louisiana, and they're living with her husband's sister. She was listed as a music teacher, and then from Louisiana, they moved to Alabama, which is where she died in 1891. So with this, which is quite faded, she used cross-stitch and cross-stitch over one. She has 3 alphabets, numbers, dividing bands. It was originally stitched in a red and green silks, but it has faded quite a bit. Let's look at the next slide here, because this is a close-up of the bottom of it. This is the text that appears on it, and it's unusual because she tells us her age. I mean, that's not unusual, but she says in the 61st year of the independence of the United States. And that is something that you do see on samplers, but is uncommon in Tennessee. And then she has a verse which shows up on a lot of samplers in English-speaking countries, Jesus, permit thy gracious name. And nobody knows where this verse came from or who authored it, but it is very popular on samplers, all, in England, in Australia, in colonies, in English-speaking parts of Scotland, Wales, and Ireland as well. So, how did it end up here? Okay, so her husband's niece, Robert Cotton's niece, married William Blount. Not this William Blount, but a William Blount. He was possibly related. So that's how we think that this sampler came here to this collection, because of that family connection. The land that she owned was adjacent to Ames Plantation, which is now a historic site. It has now been absorbed by Ames Plantation. Okay, so that's West Tennessee samplers. Middle Tennessee samplers, we found a whole bunch of those because we both live in the Nashville area. We found 178 there. Now I want to talk a little bit about a particular school that we have identified, or a particular grouping, which we call the Little Dog Group. This is the name that we invented because when you're doing original research, you get to come up with stuff like that. And these are interesting because they span about 2 decades. And they start off at the beginning of the century, worked in silks on linen, and then as you go through the 1840s and into the 1850s, the materials change. They start using wool on cotton ground fabric. And so here's a big long list of all the girls that did this, and most of them have these little dogs on them. We'll take a look at this. This is the first one out of the group, and you're looking at the reverse, because I wanted to show you how intense the colors were. Sarah Harriet Stevenson, and these are quite large. They're about 16 by 18 is the average size of these. These are square in format. And they all have this cartouche where they have their name, and they often say which county they're from. And then you can see very clearly the little dog on that one, and then a house as well. And Sarah gave us a lot of information about herself in her cartouche. That's still a reverse. She tells us what county she's in. She tells us her birth date. She tells us the day that she finished her sampler. And she lived in Spring Hill, which is on the border between Murray and Williamson County. These samplers come from Rutherford, Murray, and Williamson County. This is Mary Elizabeth Terrell, and hers is the first one that we found that was worked in wool. And this is actually worked on what we call learning canvas or learning cloth, where every 12th thread is blue. and that's to help you with your counting. Sometimes every 10th thread is a different color, sometimes it's a light pink, sometimes it's a light yellow or a blue. Blue is the most common. So this is a cotton ground fabric that she worked on. And hers is important because she very kindly named her teacher for us. And as you see there above the cartouche, it says Mary D. Patterson. And so samplers are really good clues for these family connections and information about the teachers. And Mary D. Patterson, I have to find her full name here because, okay, her nickname was Polly. So it was Mary Polly D. Watkins Patterson Drake. Watkins was her maiden name. Patterson was her first husband, and Mr. Drake was her second husband. And she did teach under the names Patterson and Drake. And she is one of 2 teachers that we have found associated with this particular grouping. So in terms of material culture, this is something that was showing up in different schools under different teachers. So the pattern is persisting through changes in the educational administration. And then this is on the, oh, it's Mary D. Patterson again. This is on the cover of the book. This is Alice Louise Bacchus. And this is the reverse of it. And so one of my pet peeves is when people tell me that they love samplers because of the old faded colors, because then I like to show them this photograph. And this particular sampler was done before synthetic dye was invented or discovered. So these are all natural dyes, and you can see how very intense these colors are. And Alice was an interesting young lady. I'll show you the front of it here. This is what the front is, and this is on the cover of the book. This is my favorite Middle Tennessee sampler. So she was born into a family of 6 children. Her father died when she was young. The family, she was born in Tennessee, but her family had come from, I can't make it go down. Her family had come from North Carolina. The mouse is not working for me. Okay, here we go. So her father died when she was 7, and her brother was appointed her guardian. So in the 19th century, even if the mother were still alive, oftentimes the court would appoint a male relative as the guardian. Now the children might stay with the mother, but her older brother was responsible for her care. And he was a teacher, and he ensured that she and her younger sister received a thorough education. She did attend Mary D. Patterson School. We know that she did. And let's see. She also attended the Columbia Female Institute, which was a huge finishing school in Columbia. I think they had 500 students at their peak. And then she also attended the Tennessee Conference Female College, where she got a teaching license or a teaching certificate. Now, we don't know if she took needlework at all of those different schools. She may have. We don't have any surviving needlework if she went on to do anything else. She used her training to become a teacher in Murray County. She did marry Major McCoy Clemson Campbell, and they had 8 children. They lived in Spring Hill, again on the border of Murray County and Williamson County. She died at the age of 74 and is buried in Rose Hill Cemetery in Murray County. And here we have, this is her guardianship records, showing that her brother was in charge of her and a portrait of her in later life. Okay, in East Tennessee, we found 74 samplers. Probably if we both lived here, we would have found as many as we did in Middle Tennessee. And what I'm going to talk about tonight is a group of samplers that we think are probably associated with the Knoxville Female Academy. We call them the Lynchburg-style samplers, and this is a name that originated with Kim Ivey, who's the textile curator at Colonial Williamsburg. Kim identified a group of samplers coming from Lynchburg that all have this particular tree on them. They all have the same motifs. So she came up with the name Lynchburg-style samplers. And then she saw that one was at auction here in Knoxville. This was in the year 2000. One came up for auction. And so she thought that maybe it had been made in Virginia and brought to Tennessee. And when we started doing this, she asked us about it. And it turns out that that particular sampler is in the collection of the East Tennessee Historical Society, and it is my favorite East Tennessee sampler. But first, let's take a look at Willie Ann Phelps. She was named for her father. And this is a very early sampler, 1825. And the reason we're placing this in this group, even though she was in Hawkins County when she made it, is the border and the alphabet, the colors, the palette, are very similar to the ones from the 1830s that we associate with Knoxville. So we think maybe a teacher moved from Virginia and came down the Great Road, maybe stopped in Hawkins County for a while and then came into Knoxville. This is Catherine Dardis, and this one is unusual because it has a little person on it. And you can see that there is that same tree on it. We've got a house that's going to show up on all of these, and a fence as well. And she was known as Kitty, and her tombstone has a different date on it than her actual date of birth. So her father was Irish and originally came to Virginia, and then by 1796 was in Hawkins County. And let's see, in 1800 the family moved to Knox County, and her father built a brick house in 1805 at the junction of Main and Cumberland Streets near Dardis Spring. He had training in law and became a register of deeds in Overton County, a land agent in Sevier County, and justice of the peace and an alderman in Knox County. And in 1818, he purchased Marble Springs, which was once owned by Governor John Sevier, but the family never lived there. And so she may have attended the Knoxville Female Academy, which was chartered in 1827. Let's see, so she lived with her sister after her family died and is actually buried in Franklin County. And the verse that shows up on this sampler, which you can't actually see in this detail shot, appears on another sampler in this group. Now this is my favorite East Tennessee sampler. This is Jane Campbell, and this is in the collection of the East Tennessee Historical Society. And this is the one that Kim saw that she thought was possibly a Virginia sampler. And so we did a lot of research into Jane, and she grew up near Loves Creek in East Knox County. And she married one of her neighbors. She went to church on the same road that she grew up on. We don't think she ever left Knox County from what we can tell. She unfortunately did not date her sampler, but she did tell us the date that she was born on it. And she married her neighbor. Let's see, her grandfather was Alexander Campbell, and the family home overlooks the French Broad River. And let's see, what else do I want to tell you? She became the second wife of Samuel Hannibal Love of Loves Creek fame. And she did not have any children of her own, but she did have stepchildren. And in their married life, they lived on Rutledge Pike. And her husband was an elder in the Spring Place Presbyterian Church, which was on the same road that she grew up with, which is where she got married. She's buried in that church cemetery. And what's interesting about this is that she used reversible stitches, but she kind of spoiled that effect by leaving all of her threads hanging. And the persistence of reversible stitching, this is a holdover from an earlier century. This is a habit that on the East Coast and in New England dies out by 1800. But here on the frontier or the backcountry or in the territories, girls were still using reversible stitches, even though they weren't making their samplers reversible in the 1830s. And here's a detail of the bottom there. So you see that house, there's a bird cage, there's a fence, there's the tree, and then there's an urn with the initials HC on it. And then here's her house, which is still standing, and her tombstone. So Mary Williams, she's right over here. This is why we think these are associated with the Knoxville Female Academy. So her parents were Ethelred Williams and Mary Copeland, and her father came to Granger County, and then was in Bean Station, and then he owned land in Knoxville. And so by 1830, the family was living in Knoxville. Her name appears in the Knoxville Female Academy records in 1829 and 1831, along with that of her sister Cornelia. So this particular sampler is dated 1834. We don't have the records of the academy from 1834, but it is likely that she continued to go to school there. And Mary, the school was actually directed by Reverend Joseph Estabrook. You know the name Estabrook if you've ever had to be on UT's campus. And he was originally from New Hampshire, and his wife was from Massachusetts. So they may have influenced the patterns as well. They operated a female academy in Staunton, Virginia, before they came to Knoxville. And Staunton is 75 miles away from Lynchburg. So it's not like they're super close, but maybe close enough for there to be a connection. Now, Mary had a very interesting life. She married John Hervey Crozier, who was also a trustee of the Knoxville Female Academy. Her husband was an attorney who served in the U.S. House of Representatives. He was considered one of the brainiest men ever sent by Tennessee to Congress. They were members of St. John's Episcopal Church. They had 9 kids, and they lived in a house that was full of books at the corner of Gay Street and Clench Avenue, not very far away from here. When the Union Army occupied Knoxville in 1863, General Ambrose Burnside commandeered their house as his headquarters because they had a large library and he wanted to read all the books. Her husband died in 1889 and she died in 1903. They're buried in the Old Gray Cemetery. Now, Mary's daughter was Lizzie Crozier French, who was a suffragist. And so there's a statue of her in Crutch Park. So their children all went on to be very accomplished. And then we have the bottom third here. We'll take a closer look at the house. Oh, here's her house that she, this is where General Ambrose read all of his books. And we have her obituary appearing in the New Sentinel here. So let's take a look here at the bottom of that sampler, because you see the house, the fence, the bird cage, the carnation, the urn, and then very, very faintly, there's a building that's actually Solomon's Temple. You can't really see it. It's right here. But that's Solomon's Temple, which is a motif that appears in various forms on a lot of samplers in the English-speaking world. It doesn't always look like that. Now, here is a fragment of a sampler that's in the collection of the Mabry Hazen house. So look at this. We've got the same house, we've got the birdcage, we've got the fence, we've got an urn, we've got the tree, we've got Solomon's Temple, and we've got urns down here with initials on it that ended, the family name starts with a C. So we actually saw these samplers on the same day. I think we came here first and did the samplers in their collection, and then we went to the Mabry Hazen house, and when they brought this out, I said, this is the exact same thing. And when we did a technical analysis, we measured it, and we do a thread count as well. And the measurement across and the thread count is exactly the same. And this, I don't know why somebody cut this one up. It was done deliberately, but this could have been done by her sister. We date it to the same time period. The samplers in Virginia are like this big. The samplers in Tennessee, it's like they took that and turned it on its side and cut it in half and gave half of the linen to this girl and half to this girl. And so I think that these two samplers were made in the same classroom at the same time, and this might very well have been made by her sister. And this one, actually, there's a verse there, which is very difficult to see. It's the same verse that shows up on Kitty Dardis's sampler. Now, that finishes the samplers that we think are associated with the Knoxville Female Academy. There is a sampler about a decade later from Blount County where you see the house and the fence, but it's bigger and it's got free embroidery up at the top. That's embroidery that is not counted. And so those big roses up at the top appear on samplers that are from Bolivar Academy in Madisonville in Monroe County. So this particular sampler is kind of a transition between two different schools here in East Tennessee. And Sarah is, her father actually wrote the poem that's on here. She put her age on it, I believe, and then there was a note on the back. And this is if you have an antiques or a family piece, please put something on the back of the frame because it tells us so much. I mean, it told us that her father wrote the poem for her sampler. And so we don't know where Sarah went to school. She might have gone to school in Blount County, but it's a good example of how patterns, the transmission of the material culture. And so here we have some close-ups of the little pigs and the little fowl there. And then it's faded, but you can see some urns and with flowers in them. Okay, so that's everything I had about Knoxville Female Academy. That middle section was what was different. For those of you who came on Tuesday, the rest of this is going to be a bit of a repeat. So whenever we do lectures, people always want to know what's the biggest, what's the smallest, how long have you been doing this, how many do you have? We documented 270 samplers. 71 samplers. We documented more than that, but not all of them turned out to be from Tennessee, which was, anytime we would find something really good, it would always be from Virginia. So we just have to send it all to Ken and say, you get another one. And like I said, I think there probably are as many in East Tennessee as we found in West Tennessee. We did document 2 from North Carolina because they had direct influences on, and we included those in the book, because they had direct influences on Tennessee samplers. And here to the right is a sampler from Marion County. The age of the sampler makers, there's 209 where we can figure out how old the girl was. And as you can see, most of them are between the ages of 9 or between the ages of 11 and 14. The ones that were done 18, 19, and 20 years old, these were probably done by teachers who were doing it as an example for their students. And then also, you know, like what I was saying before, like the sampler kind of served as a diploma. Cast your mind back to when you were a student and you had to do a senior project or a thesis. You went on with your life. Did you ever do another senior project or write another thesis? No, you did not do that, but you had those skills, right? So the sampler would be, you know, their final project. They wouldn't do another one as an adult, but some people really like stitching, just like some people really like stitching today. So they would continue to do handiwork or handicrafts. And so some of these women who are older may have just been doing it for their own pleasure. And this little one here, this girl, she went by Anne, her name is Mary Ann, and it says on it, she did it as a gift for her cousin. Anne passed work, a present to Betty Smith, and Betty was her younger cousin. By decade, you see that most of them are 1830 to 1839, but there's still quite a few going up. A lot of people say the Civil War killed sampler making. You know, yes and no. It moved out of the schoolroom. It moved out of being a subject that was taught to being something that people did for their own pleasure. What's the biggest? This one's huge. It's 40 inches tall. Now, this is more a needlework picture than a sampler. This would have been done from a chart, much like we have today. This is oftentimes called Berlin work. This was done with a mix of wool and silk on a canvas. And this was done at the Salem Female Academy. And in the 19th century, the Salem Female Academy was the most prestigious academy in the Southeast. And we actually received 2 fellowships to do study there in their archives. The Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts funded that, and so Salem College is still in existence. So we went to Salem Village and the Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts and spent a lot of time there going through all their archives. And just to give you an idea, like Sarah Childress, who grew up to marry James K. Pope, went to school there. So if you were a family of means and you were very ambitious for your children, you would try to get them to this school. And we did not know what we would find when we went there. We had, I think, 7 different embroideries that were done by Tennessee girls who we knew had gone to school there. And so we started going through all these index cards with their names, with their hometown, and who had paid their bills, and what their student number, what day they had arrived there, and what classes they took, and when they went home. And we found 482 girls from Tennessee who went to school at Salem Female Academy in the 19th century. And Tennessee girls, after North Carolina girls, were the largest contingent and made up about 20% of the class each year. And in fact, Salem Female Academy, Chief John Ross sent his daughter there. Jane went to school there. All right, what's the smallest? Another East Tennessee sampler. This one shows German influences, which you can tell by the W's. And unfortunately, it's not dated, but it's probably circa 1807, which is very early for Tennessee, and it is quite small. It is only 5 3/4 by 7 1/4, and it's from Greene County. The oldest is also from East Tennessee, no surprise there. Susanna Hale, she did date it 1807. This is in the collection of Traveler's Rest. And she left it unfinished. And this is another myth that people love to tell me is if it's left unfinished, oh, she died. Okay, if you're a stitcher, you have an unfinished project somewhere, don't you? Doesn't mean she died. She did not die while she was doing it. She grew up and lived quite a while. She just got tired of stitching. And then the most recent, or the youngest samplers, we don't know where these are. We don't know who owns these. The Colonial Dames revived their sampler survey and again asked their members to submit photos. So these are photos that were submitted to the Colonial Dames. These are from Nashville, two sisters, dated 1879 and 1889. And you can see the influence here of wool. These are done in wool. One of them's done on learning canvas. And these are very much of the time period. Even if they didn't have the dates on them, we would be able to place them in the 1880s. And so if anybody knows who owns these, feel free to tell me because I'd like to track them down. And here's our contact info because I know somebody out there has a sampler that they wonder why I haven't come and documented it yet. Oh, I thought you knew I had one. I thought I told you about that. So I think we can now stop and take some questions if anybody has any.
I have a question.
Yeah, darling.
When you first talked about samplers coming from South Africa, if I heard you correctly, could you talk more about that?
I'm sorry, North Africa.
North Africa.
North Africa. So samplers have been found like in the pyramids, so there's the Malmuk Empire. There are samplers associated with that, which went all the way across North Africa. And those are very long strips of linen, very narrow strips of linen. They are mostly done in running stitches, and so sort of the precursor to black work. And they're ancient. And so a lot of people like to say that Catherine of Aragon brought black work to England, which is probably not true, but it's a nice story. But there was a Moorish influence on Spain, and so those patterns, the sort of scrolling borders that would have gone around cuffs or around collars. These were done by men. These were done by male professional embroiderers who would have a sample of their work, which they could then take to the market and they would unroll it. And somebody would come up and say, I like that one. That's what I want on the hem of my robe. So there's samplers in all kinds of different media. Traveling salesmen used to have like little miniature pieces of furniture that are very popular with collectors. Those are samples, So the word sampler comes from the word example. And so samplers went from being practical. So if you're familiar, I know you're familiar with the needlework of Mary, Queen of Scots, she probably had a sampler that she was working from. And so you could look over here and see your little cat, and then you could do it on your cushion that you were going to put out. And when you look at the history of printing, the first things to be printed were books of hours. The next thing to be printed were design books with charts that could be adapted for painting, for needlework, for pottery. And then the next thing to be printed after that was Bibles. So there was a great appetite for design across Europe. And so you see books moving across Europe, you see teachers taking patterns with them. Other questions? Yes. No? Yeah.
I'm going to ask a stupid question. What did they use for needles? Did they have the ability to create metal needles that were actually very sophisticated and fine,
Yeah.
finely drawn?
You know, what's interesting about textiles is textiles were one of the first commercial ventures to industrialize. So if you think about the north of England, and Manchester and Leeds and the great satanic mills, that was all textiles. And so there are also factories producing needles. It was a skill. If you think about people's last names, you know, you might know somebody whose last name is Needles, you know, their family was probably producing needles. And so, yes, another thing that we know, another one of my pet peeves is when people tell me, oh, they did it by candlelight. No, they did not do it by candlelight. You have to have light. And we know from archaeology that they would sit next to a window because when you take up the floor, there's hundreds of needles that have fallen through the floorboards. Hundreds of them. So yes, yeah, needles would have been accessible. These girls, the Sarah Harriet Stevenson sampler, there is a girl from, Sarah Harriet Stevenson is from Murray County. There's a girl from Rutherford County who did a different pattern. It's the same shape, it's square, but it's a different pattern. But the colors are exactly the same. And these girls did not know each other. We looked into it, they did not know each other. Their samplers were done in the same year. They both went downtown to the dry goods store and bought a packet of silks from the same supplier who was bringing them down the river or, you know, over land to peddle them to the different dry goods stores. So just like you can buy a chart pack today, you could then as well. Yes.
And so would the linen be kind of the same thing?
Yes, yes, linen was a commercial venture. And most of this was purchased linen that, you know, or maybe the teacher arranged to have it. We know from the Salem Female Academy records because they kept track of how many skeins of silk they sold to the girls and how many lengths of linen. Janet and I spent a lot of time looking at Andrew Jackson's records. He owned 4 general stores in the Nashville area. And what was interesting about that is he was selling skeins of silk one at a time to people, and it would be the same person who would come in. So so-and-so bought 4 skeins of red silk, so-and-so bought 1 skein of black silk. So there was an attempt to produce silk in South Carolina that didn't really, it was there for a while, but it did not become an industry for South Carolina. South Carolina is not now known for their mulberry trees, but the linen would have probably been imported from Ireland or the north of England or Germany. And there's some that we think that maybe it was homespun, and we do say that in the book that, you know, we think maybe this one was made at home. Yes?
What are some of the characteristics that you look for to identify samplers by decade?
Oh, well, most of them are dated. So that helps. Some of them are unfinished, but we look at the materials because there is a shift from silk and linen to wool and linen or wool and cotton in the 1840s. We also look at the shape of the sampler. Long and narrow is the beginning of the century, square is towards the end of the century. But samplers are really the perfect item of material culture to study because there's so much information on the sampler itself. There's the name, there's the birth date, there's her parents' name, there's the town that she grew up in, there's her teacher's name. And then you can also tell from looking at the materials a lot about it as well.
Could you talk a bit about the use of patterns or charts, or when that began, or were they looking at other samplers and working exclusively from those when they made theirs, or did they have paper patterns?
So patterns and pattern books started with the beginning of the printing press, so 1500s, 1600s. And there's a book called Schoolhouse for the Needle, and it's been reproduced. It's like a little narrow pamphlet, and it's just filled with patterns that you would recognize: strawberries, carnations, stuff like that. Probably we didn't find this in Tennessee, but there is in Pennsylvania. There's a Pennsylvania sampler book, if you can ever find that. There was an example where a teacher had drawn her own graph paper and had marked the motifs out on it. So what might have happened in a classroom, because we do see samplers that match each other coming out of the same schools, It may have been that the teacher said, okay, what color do you want your border to be? I want pink. I want lots and lots of pink. All right, well here, I'm gonna sketch out for you, or I'm gonna draw out for you what that corner will look like. And so they might have given them the motifs and the patterns sort of piecemeal. Like, okay, you've done your pattern, now you're gonna do the alphabet. Here's an alphabet, which is why you sometimes see alphabets running off the end of the sampler or being squished together because they didn't do their planning very well. Okay, now you're down at the bottom, now you get to do fun things. Do you wanna do a dog? Okay, here's a dog, put dogs all over it. And some of them put like the little dog skull. There's like 14 dogs on some of them. Really liked their dogs. Okay, do you want a tree? Sure, I want a tree. And so a lot of it would depend upon how ambitious the girl herself was and how strict the teacher was. I mean, there's some things on samplers where I'm like, I don't think I would have let them get away with that, And then there's others where it's kind of loosey-goosey, It's sort of, maybe the teacher wasn't interested in stitching, but she knew that she had to offer that as a source of extra income for herself. And I guess I didn't really say this, but there's kind of a series of sampler makings. Like the first sampler that you made might have been just an alphabet sampler. The ones that we're looking at here are kind of intermediate samplers. And then if you went on and did more education at a finishing school, you might have done a grand pictorial embroidery, which is a whole nother lecture, which we won't do today. Yes?
For the Mary Williams sampler,
Mhm.
how long do you think that might have taken to produce, knowing that she was probably learning other things during her course of time at the school?
Yes, so we know from school records that they would have had a designated time to work, like just like we have a school schedule today, and we start off with math, and then we go to English class, and then we go to science class. So they would have had their needlework class when the light was the best. So in the winter, it would have been in the morning, and in the summer, it would have been in the afternoon. And samplers in needlework embroidery were generally designed to take a semester or a term. So that could be 3 months, could be 6 months, however long the school divided their terms up into. So definitely it would have been under a year because you would be working on it probably every weekday. So 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, somewhere in there. And we know from letters that girls wrote home. There's one from a Rhode Island schoolgirl that she wrote to her father where she's like, "Oh, Papa, you will be so pleased when you see how much work I have done on my sampler, and you must get the very best frame for it." So it was something they were communicating about to their family back home.
Could you go back to the one that had the flowers at the top, to the detail?
Yeah, the one from Blount County?
Yeah.
That one, yeah.
Yeah, can I see the detail?
Pardon?
The flower detail? I think it's
Yeah.
at the next
Oh,
slide.
sorry.
Yeah.
There we go. So that's free embroidery. So actually, we can see the pencil marks. So the teacher would have taken a pencil mark, and she would have said, "Okay, you want pink roses? All right, I'm going to draw the outline for you. Do your outline in yellow silk. Okay, now you can do your pink." And then she would have drawn the leaves as well. Yes?
As you get further to the east of Tennessee or further to the west of North Carolina, did you find any relationship of like these samplers to Cherokee?
That's a good question.
Making or weaving or anything
Yeah,
like
that's a
that?
good question. We looked really hard, and we found one Cherokee sampler from Brainerd Mission School, and it was pre-removal, and it was at a co-ed school that had both white and Cherokee children in it. So there's probably more out there. I suspect that because samplers are emotionally important to people and they're easy to transport, that they're probably all in Oklahoma. Somebody who, I'm not going to do it, but if somebody wants a really awesome thesis topic, you can go to Oklahoma and track down some Tennessee, Georgia, and North Carolina samplers for us. And that one is now in the collection of the State Museum. And we do have a section in our book about Cherokee samplers. We have pictures of 3 different samplers, 2 from North Carolina and 1 from Tennessee. And the State Museum is going to have a sampler exhibit in August, and that one is going to be on display.
This August?
Yes, this August, yeah. And I'll be doing a talk, really just can't get enough samplers, on August 10th, Saturday, at 11 o'clock in the morning at the Tennessee State Museum. Okay, I think that does it. So if you haven't purchased a book, we still have some, or if you need charts or note cards, we have those as well.